Welcome to our continuing adult faith formation series on the epic tales of the ancient people of God. If you remember, last week we ended up with Isaac and Rebekah, who had married and had children. Sarah and Abraham had died, and the family, the great family, was now beginning. We talked about how many religions trace their roots back to Abraham and Sarah, as do we. Now, a lot happened between that story and this story, so I'm going to bring you up to date a little bit. Rebekah and Isaac had children. They had two children. They had two boys, Jacob and Esau. You may remember the story of how Esau cheated Jacob out of the birthright, and how Jacob wrestled with God and was given the name, essentially the name Israel. That was Jacob's name. And Jacob then had 12 sons. And these 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Jacob, named Israel. And well, what happened was that, if you remember what happened, they sold Joseph, the son that they were, or the brother that they were so jealous of because he got a nice coat and his father liked him best. They sold him into slavery into Egypt. And as the story goes, they finally had to make their way to Egypt because they were out of food. And that's this story. So, are you ready for a story? Now, in the Godly Play room, we have a piece of the desert. Not the whole desert, because many of the stories of the people of God took place in the desert. And the desert can be a dangerous place. It's very hot during the day. People wear many layers of clothes to protect themselves from the sun and from the heat. It's very cold at night, and they wear many clothes to protect themselves from the cold. There's very little food in the desert. Very little water. And when the wind blows, the desert can change its shape, and so you can get lost. People really only go into the desert if they need to. The people of God were living in a place where the rains did not come. The crops did not grow. There was no grain to grind to make bread. The people were hungry. The children cried in their sleep. And so the people decided to journey to a country where there was food, even if they had to travel through the desert. They began their journey to Egypt. It was a long journey, a difficult journey. But finally, they arrived. Now the king in Egypt was called Pharaoh. And there was food to eat, and there was work to do. But the Pharaoh trapped them. They had to get up when the Pharaoh said to get up. They had to go to bed when the Pharaoh said to go to bed. They had to eat when the Pharaoh said to eat. They had to work when the Pharaoh said to work. They had to do everything that the Pharaoh said. They were slaves. They could not go home. Now one of the people of God was named Moses. And Moses came to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh said, "No." Many times Moses came to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh said, "No." Many strange things began to happen in the land. And Moses came to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." But every time Pharaoh said, "No." And then something terrible happened. All of the oldest sons of every Egyptian family, even the family of the Pharaoh, died. The oldest sons of the people of God did not die. They would put the blood of a lamb on their doorpost, and the angel of death passed over them. So Moses came to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh said, "Yes." Well, the people hurried to pack everything they could together, all of their belongings. They baked bread for the journey. But they did not put leaven in the bread so that it would become tall and fluffy like the bread that we eat. Their bread was flat. You can still eat that bread today. It's called matzo. And every time you eat the matzo, you can taste this story. The people rushed into the desert. They were so afraid that Pharaoh would change his mind. And then they heard the sound that they were the most afraid of. It was the sound of the Pharaoh's army coming after them. The sound of the horses' hooves and the chariots' wheels were like thunder. They were pressed up against the water. But Moses felt so close to God, and God came so close to Moses that Moses knew how to lead the people through the water into freedom. This one is happy. This one is scared. This one is confused. When they got to the other side, the waters closed up, and Pharaoh's army could not get through. They were free, and they were so happy. They prayed to God to give thanks, and Miriam led the dancing. Now, I wonder what part of this story you liked the best. I wonder what part of this story is the most important part. It could be the same as the one you like the best, but it could be different. I wonder if there's any part of the story that you would take out and still have all the story you need. And I wonder where you are in this story, or what part of this story is about you. Those are some wondering questions for you to wonder about at home. This story, of course, is the story of the Exodus. As I said, after Joseph was sold into slavery himself, he traveled to Egypt, and soon gained the favor of that Pharaoh, and assumed a very powerful position in government, so that when his brothers came looking for food, Joseph was able to provide them with food. And in time, that whole family, the children of Israel, the sons of Jacob and their families, came to Egypt, because indeed there was famine in Canaan, the area where they lived. In the Bible, there's an interesting line about this new Pharaoh that had forgotten about Joseph. They no longer knew about Joseph in Egypt. And so they enslaved these Hebrew people, these children of Israel, for many, many, many decades probably. And then we had today's story. The story of the plagues and Moses insisting, and finally freedom on the other side of the Red Sea. This story is a powerful story, and one that has been embraced by many who have felt oppressed, who have felt enslaved, longing for their own exodus, their own route to freedom. In many ways, the Exodus occurred again for these same people after the Second World War, when they made their way back. They escaped, well, not many didn't escape the Holocaust, but many who had escaped the Holocaust and escaped Europe came back into the land. That in itself was considered an exodus. This story was very popular with slaves in the United States of America during the era of slavery. They too longed for freedom, to be on the other side, as it were. And so it can also be a powerful story for us as individuals, who in different ways may feel ourselves oppressed or enslaved, and long for our freedom. So these are some things for you to wonder about. Thank you for joining me And we will return again next week, where we'll hear what happens just after they cross over into the wilderness. Thank you.